welcome to Quadratics 2.1, Introduction to Factored Form. Okay, so for this first slide, we have two things that you want to make sure you understand before I go on to the example problems. And the first one being factored form. Yeah, so factored form basically is where you have two parentheses or more. Yeah, that's basically being multiplied to each other. Yeah, actually, in some situations there can be one parentheses with something on the outside, but in the problems that we're going to be working with, it's usually going to be two sets of parentheses that are multiplied to each other, and because it's in that form, where it's going to kind of look like what we have here on the side. Is it in pen mode? Yeah, it should be. Okay, so it's going to kind of look like that. Oops, maybe I better draw that circle a little bit better. It's going to kind of look like what we have here. Okay, where you have those two parentheses multiplied to each other, and you can have something on the outside of the parentheses. That's fine. Yeah, but basically, you're going to be using this form to, in essence, solve for x. Okay, and when we have factored form, you're gonna use it in conjunction with what is called zero product property. So I'm not going to test you on what this property is called. Yeah, it's just gonna be one of those things where you're gonna start using this property without even knowing it. Yeah, you're gonna just do it because you're gonna see it happen so many times in so many problems, and you're gonna be not even realizing you're actually using zero product property. Okay, but here's basically what zero product property is. It says basically this, that when I multiply things together, if my eventual answer is 0, then one of the things that I multiplied must have been a 0, because that's the only way I can get a 0 as an answer when I'm doing multiplication. Yeah, so it basically says, so if you multiply A and B together, and if the product of A and B becomes 0, then that means that either A was 0 or B was 0, because you can't get an answer from a multiplication problem to become 0 unless something that you just multiplied was a 0 as well. Yeah, or in this case, yeah, both of them could be 0 also, but somebody has to be a 0 at the very least if you're going to get a 0 for an answer to a multiplication problem. Okay, and that's what zero product property pretty much talks about. Yeah, so it's gonna, when you get the explanation of zero product property, you're gonna be like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, but how does this relate to factored form? Well, that's what the example problems that we're going to do in the very next slide are going to pretty much show you. Okay, so you have the first parentheses, x minus 4, times the second parentheses, x plus 10. Yeah, and when those two parentheses multiply together, they're going to make an answer of 0. Okay, so the thing that's going to be kind of weird is, right, how do I get an answer of 0 when neither of the two parentheses are a 0? Right, and if neither of the two parentheses are a 0, how do I get an answer of 0? Okay, and that's where the variable comes in, right? You see a letter x in each parenthesis, so basically that x is going to do something for us. It's gonna make one of the parentheses, right? One, or maybe it's going to make both of them, but it's going to make at least one of the parentheses turn into a 0. Yeah, so, and by figuring out what value of x turns the entire parentheses into a value of 0, you're basically solving for x. Okay, when your problem is in factored form. And you're going to be using this a lot in future lessons when we start doing factoring. You might remember factoring from Algebra 1 days, but yeah, when we do factoring, it's going to leave our next step in what is called factored form, and if we're told to solve for x in that problem as well, then you want to use zero product property to figure out the answers for x, the ones that are going to turn the entire parentheses into a 0, so that when it multiplies, it gets an answer of 0 correctly. Okay, so here's how I set that up. So let me write the problem on the bottom here so I can manipulate it by writing stuff around it and underneath it and all kind of stuff. So x minus 4 times x plus 10 equals 0. So I want to figure out what number I can plug in for either of the x's, and when I plug in that number, it's going to turn the entire parentheses into a 0, and when it does that, then I have essentially solved for x, basically. Okay, so to do that, we're going to just basically set each parentheses, or yeah, each set of parentheses, so x minus 4, we're going to set the entire thing equal to 0. And same thing for x plus 10, we're going to set the entire parentheses in equal to 0. Okay, we're going to make basically an equation that we can manipulate to solve for x. Yeah, so we want to set the entire parentheses called x minus 4 equal to the number that we want it to turn into, right? Because remember I said, to get an answer of 0, one of these two parentheses needs to become 0. because if it doesn't become 0, then I'm not going to ever get my answer of 0 to a multiplication problem. So that's why I'm setting x minus 4 equal to 0, because I want to figure out what number makes the entire parenthesis 0. So I'm going to basically solve for x. Okay, so how do I get rid of negative 4? And hopefully you say add 4 on both sides, because if you did say that, then you're correct. That's good to go. So we're going to get x on the left side, and we're going to get 4 on the right side. So if I had 4, if I plug 4, let's say I plug a 4 right in place of this x right here. So I'm going to basically have 4 minus 4, right? And then the next x is going to be 4 plus 10. So first parentheses is basically 0, right? So I got a 0 in the first parentheses. I got a 14 in the next parentheses. Does that result in an answer of 0? Yeah, it does. So I just found my first answer of x. Okay? So there's a second answer for x as well, because there's a second parentheses that has an x inside of it, but with a different number. It's not minus 4 next to that x, it's a plus 10. Okay, so let's solve for the second parentheses and figure out what it takes to make him become 0. So we're going to go x plus 10 equals 0, and we're going to solve for x, so we're going to get rid of that positive 10, and the only way to do that is to subtract 10 on both sides. And when I do that, I get x equals negative 10. Okay, so if I plug in negative 10, right, then it should zero out that second parentheses, which is going to make my eventual answer to a multiplication problem of 0. Okay, and if you don't believe me, let's just try it. So let's plug negative 10 in place of each of the x's. So if I plug negative 10 in my first x, I get negative 10 minus 4, which is negative 14. And if I plug negative 10 into the second parentheses, I get negative 10 plus 10, which is 0. And does that eventually make an answer of 0? Yes, it does. So that set of numbers, which I need to write on the line, let's not forget about that. And when you write your answers on this line, please make sure you write the answers in numerical order, where the smallest number is on the left, the bigger number is on the right. So negative 10 you're going to write first because that's the smaller number, and 4 you're going to write second because that's the bigger number. Okay, so those are my two numbers that make zeros in one of each of the parentheses, yeah? In one of the parentheses, basically. Okay? Alright, so let's look at my second problem. Okay, so second problem, a little bit trickier. You don't see two sets of parentheses, but you do still see two x's. One x is on the inside of the parentheses, one x is on the outside of the parentheses. So therefore, you know you're going to have two answers. So if you just count how many times you wrote the letter x, yeah, when I just wrote it in purple just now, if you count the amount of times I literally physically wrote the letter x, that's going to kind of tell you or give you a clue as far as how many answers I can expect to see in this problem. I can expect to see at least two answers. Yeah, it might be the same exact number twice in some situations, but I know I'm going to have to solve for x twice because I see x is one x on the outside of the parentheses, one x inside the parentheses. Okay, so when I solve for x, I'm going to set it up the exact same way I did for problem A. I'm going to put an equals 0. Yeah, so actually you might want to do this. Yeah, so if you want to kind of make it look like the previous problem, you can surround 2x in parentheses, and then you're going to go equals 0, so 2x equals 0 basically. And then you're going to go x plus 10 equals 0, and you're going to do exactly what I did in the previous problem. You're going to solve for x. Okay, so we're going to go 2x equals 0. And how do I get rid of that 2? Hopefully you say divide by 2, because if you said that, then you're right on track. So you get x on the left side, 0 on the right side. Okay, so x equals 0. That's your first answer. So I can actually just write it on the line. X equals 0. Alright, so what about my second one? X plus 10 equals 0. So x plus 10 equals 0. And I think I solved that before. Yeah, I did. It's in the previous problem. Okay, so you subtract 10 both sides. And we get x equals negative 10. Surprise, surprise, right? It's not like we didn't see that coming. Oops. Write the negative first. That would be nice. Okay, so negative 10. Alright, so where should I put? Make sure I put the negative 10 in the right spot. I cannot put him after the 0 because 0 is actually the bigger number, so I have to put it before the 0. So make sure you put it in numerical order when you write your answers on the line. Okay? Alright, let's do last problem, number C, or letter C rather. Okay, so we're back to two parentheses. Let's write down the problem underneath so I can manipulate it. Let's go back to blue ink. So 4x plus 1 times the quantity x plus 9 equals 0. Okay, so same thing in the previous two columns. Put an equals 0 wherever I see, oops, let me change the ink color. Yeah, because these are things that I'm introducing to the problem. Yeah, it wasn't there in the beginning, so yeah, I want to make sure I change the color so that you guys can see the difference between what was there and what I had to introduce into the problem. So put an equals 0 next to each of the x's, right? So because I put equals 0 twice, I'm going to solve for x twice. So you always want to put an equals 0 whenever you see an x physically written on your paper or in one of your steps. Okay, so let's solve for x. So 4x plus 1 equals 0. So what do I get rid of first? Do I divide by 4 first, or do I subtract 1? And hopefully you guys remember that we wanted to reverse PEMDAS. So reverse PEMDAS says get rid of the positive 1. So we're going to subtract 1 on both sides. Okay, so you get 4x on the left, and you get negative 1 on the right. Okay, so how do I get rid of 4? Well, you divide by 4. You break that bond that 4 and x have together with themselves, and it's connected with multiplication, so to break that bond, you divide. So you get x equals, and I see a single occurrence of a negative, so I know my answer is negative. And 1 divided by 4, I cannot simplify that fraction. It's already been simplified, or it can't be divided by any common number, so I just leave it as 1/4. So on my line, I write negative 1/4. Okay, and ooh, I didn't really leave myself that much space. Maybe I can just squeeze it in on the side here. Yeah, I can't squeeze it in on the bottom because, yeah, there's no more space. It was not going to fit. So let's just squeeze it on the side. So we got x plus 9. X plus 9. Actually, you know what? I'll just do this. I'll make it side by side, like that. Okay, so x plus 9 equals 0. Yeah, and to solve for x, I'm going to get rid of that positive 9 by subtracting it. And I get x equals negative 9. So there's my second answer. And you can check it if you want. I'm not going to require that. Yeah, I mean, for other problems, I'm going to require you to check answers. But for this problem, yeah, you just got to trust that you solve for x correctly. So where does negative 9 go in relation to negative 1/4? Does it go on the right of the negative 1/4, or does it go on the left? So you got to remember now, when you compare negative numbers to each other, yeah, you're dealing with basically the distance from 0. So negative 9 is farther from 0, so that's why it's smaller, because you're comparing two negative numbers to each other. Okay? Alright, so I don't think this section has any homework problems, so you kind of look out. Well, we know we're going to have to eventually use zero product property to solve for x in this scenario eventually. Yeah, I think it's going to happen in lesson 3.3 or 2.3 or something like that. It's going to happen pretty soon, so yeah, you're going to see it pretty soon, so it's not like it's going to be a big deal that you didn't get to practice it right now. You're going to have lots and lots and lots of problems to practice this concept, so don't worry about that. Okay? Alright, so I will see you in class, and bye-bye.